Hey YouTube, good morning, it's Chuck. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about small hive beetles, small hive beetle control. Specifically, much like my channel is pretty much about here in the South. I'm in Zone 9A in Jacksonville, Florida, and small hive beetles, especially in the summer, are almost too much for a new beekeeper to control that doesn't understand a little bit about how small hive beetles come into a hive, how they take over a hive, and the life cycle of the small hive beetle in order to understand it. There's been some research and some work over the last few years that's starting to come into the beekeeping community that I wanted to talk a little bit about and just give some background and information so you can make your own informed decisions. This is not advice, this is kind of just a little bit of my research coming out to you so you can do your own and understand what is being looked into by several people in academia. First, to start off, and what this primary video is about a chemical insecticide called Chlorantraniliprole. And yes, I practiced saying that several times. It is a chemical insecticide that is primarily used in agriculture for controlling grubs in turf grasses, and that's essentially where it evolved. A little bit of background history. Dr. Daniel Potter has done a lot of research in this, and you can look him up. He has done some work with looking for an insecticide to control grubs in turf grasses. Now, think about who needs good turf grasses: golf courses. People pay a lot of money to have perfect lawns in turf in golf courses, and that's where most of the money went into this. That did not affect honeybees, so they were looking for a better insecticide than Chlorantraniliprole. Yes, I didn't practice that quite as much, but that was a insecticide they've been using for a long time, but it had some adverse effects for bumblebees and honeybees. So Chlorantraniliprole needed a better solution. And Dr. Daniel Potter started doing some work with Chlorantraniliprole. And Chlorantraniliprole ended up showing very low toxicity to bumblebees and honeybees. And it looks like it is perhaps something that could be used in the vicinity of an apiary. And that's kind of where we are today. A lot of people are reporting that this insecticide is helping control the life cycle of the small hive beetle. Now I have two products here. This is called GrubX, and this is what most of you are hearing about if you're watching some videos. This can be acquired at Home Depot, and that's where I bought this. This is available at Walmart and Lowe's. This is about a 28-pound bag, and it cost about $31. It is a granule, and it is for broadcast spreading. The same chemical ingredient can be found in something in a concentrated form. This is called aceleprin. Aceleprin, I bought this off of Amazon. It's much more concentrated, meaning smaller doses, and it's in liquid format. And this small little 4-ounce bottle cost about $81. But of course, it's probably going to go much further. So these two products have the active ingredient Chlorantraniliprole. There are labels and there are dosage descriptions of both of these products, from which I'll talk a little bit about now. GrubX, and both of them, basically what they do is they are for soil applications. They go into the soil and they prevent the grub from pupating. And in the life cycle of a small hive beetle, it's essentially when the larva leaves the hive, goes into the soil to pupate, it will be unable to pupate in the soil. There are some descriptions on the EPA website and the insecticide website, which I'll show you, that talk about the actual chemical reaction that essentially paralyzes the larva so that it eventually dies and cannot pupate. And it's a soil treatment. This is not for use inside your hives, at least not yet. That has not been demonstrated yet. Some interesting thoughts on this we'll talk about in a little bit also. So the life cycle of the small hive beetle. This is not going to be an exhaustive thing, but essentially the life cycle of the small hive beetle will start with the adult. An adult beetle can fly up to 4 kilometers or so, this is obviously evidence, to smell and find hives that have the odors that they prefer. Now, odors they prefer are probably sweet and yeasty, pollen and honey. It has been demonstrated that small hive beetles prefer to fly at dusk and dawn and like shaded areas, so lower light. Bright sunlight is something that the small hive beetles do not prefer. So when locating an apiary, maybe put them in the brightest sun spot you can to protect your entrances from the entry of small hive beetles. Once the adult goes into the hive, it essentially is looking for food and a location to lay eggs. And this is where most of us as beekeepers see our small hive beetles, the adults scurrying around, and we're trying to control the adults so that they essentially don't come into our hive or they don't get the chance to lay eggs. But once they find a hive and a location to lay eggs, if the bees were not able to keep them at bay, they enter the egg stage. Once the eggs are laid, a female can lay 1,000 to 2,000 eggs in her lifetime, so we're on a lot of eggs. Not quite the eggs of a queen bee that lays over her lifetime, but a lot of eggs get laid in a small cell. They're about half the size of an egg that a honeybee lays, so they're even harder to see with the naked eye than the eggs from a honeybee. Once the eggs are laid, they hatch into larvae in about 2 to 4 days. So let's just say half of a week, is where we are there. They're in the larval stage, which is a small little white larva, and crawling around. They look a lot like maggots, and I'll show you some pictures of what they look like. And they're in this larval and feeding stage where they're eating honey, pollen, and this is the typical stage where they destroy a hive by sliming it with this mucus that they put off. This is where the hives are destroyed, and typically when the bees abscond. They are in this larval stage for about a week, 7 to 10 days. So this is typically when you see the bees leave the hive and when a beekeeper realizes they lost it. If they are in your hive a week and they go into the wandering phase, which is the time where they're going to look for a location to pupate, they leave the hive, and studies show that they typically pupate in soil about 4 inches down and usually within 90 centimeters, or about a meter away from the location where they came out. That's average. But Dr. Jamie Ellis in Florida has done a lot of study on these bugs, these small hive beetles, and he has seen evidence that they will go hundreds of meters in order to find a location to pupate. A little bit of a question here. If you're putting a beehive on a concrete pad, it will most likely crawl across the concrete pad and go find soil to pupate in. If you're putting hives on top of plastic, they can crawl across that plastic until they can find soil to pupate in. But if you have soil under your hive, a question that I still have, and that soil is treated, will they crawl across treated soil in order to find untreated soil in order to pupate? I think the answer to that is no, because they cannot detect the insecticide in the soils. But that is something that I'll just say I don't know, and I have not found evidence of that. So treating the soil around your hives, I believe, is a good opportunity to control the pupation cycle of the small hive beetle. So the small hive beetle, let's just say, enters this pupation stage, and this is the longest part of the life cycle. It can vary widely on how long it can pupate. In colder climates, and if they start pupating early in the winter and the temperatures drop, they can stay in the soil all winter and come out of the ground next winter. But typically when they explode here in the south, and obviously temperature and humidity are large factors here, the low end of the scale for these creatures to pupate is about 3 weeks. 3 to 6 weeks is what's published, but I'm just going to the end, the lower end in warm weather here in Jacksonville, Florida. And then they pupate and they come up and they emerge from the ground as an adult small hive beetle, and the life cycle begins. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I'm doing most of this from memory. I don't have notes behind the camera. If you've got a 2 to 4 day egg cycle, half of a week, you've got a 7 to 10 day larval stage, let's just say about a week, and a 3 to 6 weeks, let's go to the low end, 3 week pupation stage. It's about 5 weeks from the laying of an egg until the emerging of an adult for the small hive beetle here in the south. So if your summer begins in, April, May, and goes until October, there are several life cycles of a small hive beetle with warm temperatures in order for which these populations to just explode. And with the numbers of eggs that can be laid, it can be out of control. So back to the insecticides, ground treating. If we can break the life cycle of pupation by treating the soil around our hives with a Grub-X granule, or perhaps a liquid through aceleprin or another product using the insecticide Chlorantraniliprole, we might be able to slow this down. Now granted, And admittedly, this does not stop a small hive beetle from another beekeeper flying within the 4 kilometers of its winged range and flight range to come into your hives. And this is just something we cannot control. This is very similar to controlling Varroa from our foragers going and having mite bombs in other hives and perhaps even in feral colonies. We can't control that. But what can we do for our hives? And I have used this year for the first time, and I can say I do not have nearly the small hive beetle populations I have had in years past with the ground drenching of this insecticide in the vicinity of my hives. And I have used the liquid to this point in a spray bottle format. So I think this is something to consider. Now, Dr. Lewis Bartlett at the University of Georgia put out a video, and Bob Binney was nice enough to repost that, and I'll show the links of this in the description. I really encourage you to watch it. There's a longer discussion on the evolution to this point, and even talks about some other control options involving hydrogen peroxide that I think have some opportunity, and he talks about that. He is hoping and hopefully getting some grant money to further explore this for use inside the hive, perhaps one day. And what he's talking about, and the tests he has run in his lab, are using dosages of chlorantraniliprole inside of pollen patty sort of substance and watching whether or not the larva can breed. And there is definitely a different dosage that he talked about between the dosage in order to keep a larva from growing and to kill an adult. He did not give any sort of specifications on what those dosages were, and the charts used in his video were generic using the log base 10 graph, so that there is no dosage information there. I would be careful on extrapolating anything out of this because it was not given. But if we can prevent larvae from eating our pollen patties, if we can find a dosage that can be used to kill small hive beetles but not kill honeybees, I think this is definitely a bright future and something to explore. So keep your eye on the University of Georgia, Dr. Lewis Bartlett, and any other sort of research on this chemical insecticide. But label is the law, and it is not authorized for use inside of your hives as of this time. And I think that is the important lesson here, is this is for control outside of the hive in a ground drench, and that's how I'm going to use it. I do have a yard. I'm going to spray some of this GrubX for the first time. That is not here at the location where I am today, so I'm going to have a separate out yard that had a much larger beetle problem this year than here in my home apiary, and that's how I'm doing a little bit of a controlled, where I didn't use any ground treatment out there, and the beetles were unbelievably populated. In here, where I had the ground drench, they weren't. So they're about, 1,000 meters apart. So I think that the populations is the same. So it definitely seems to have made a difference. Okay, so I think that is the highlights of what I wanted to talk about. Keep your eye on Dr. Bartlett. Keep an eye on what we're doing there. I'm going to probably show a few more graphs and things like that, and talk a little bit with a voiceover to finish this video, because there's some more information I want you to have. But I hope you enjoy this, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, YouTube, I'm out here in my side apiary, and this is the one I was talking about a little bit earlier, where we had a much more difficult small hive beetle problem. And if you can notice here, underneath these oak trees in this shaded area, I had 3 hives, 3 small little nucleus boxes back on that back wall that were completely lost to small hive beetle infestation. Out here in this long laying and this one side nuke, I didn't have near the problem. There were beetles in all of these locations, but back there in the shade, completely overtaken. Now granted, I did not have any traps or anything in the hives either, so it was a situation where I didn't do anything to combat the beetles and they took over. But in locations with just a little bit more sun, it was a little bit better. Now what I'm gonna do in this yard, different than my other yard, is I'm gonna use the GrubX granule dosage here. The important thing to recognize is this bag specifically says only 1 application per year and no more than 2.87 pounds, I believe, per 1,000 square feet. So this area I'm going to go ahead and spread is 1,000 square feet. I've measured off what I'm going to spread, and I'm going to use that dosage. So this is just going to be a ground spread here, and I'll just give you a quick here so you can actually see me do it. It's a very small granule. Maybe you can see this a little bit. It's kind of like sand is about the consistency of it. So it's not like regular fertilizer or anything like that. It's very sandy consistency to the actual GrubX. So This is just for you to kind of see an application. And that's all it was, just a quick dosage, one-time treatment. I'm not gonna do it the rest of the year. That's how we're gonna see how this Grub-X works on the ground to help break the pupation cycle of the small hive beetle. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay, I'm inside and I figured I would do a little bit of a voiceover to give a few more of the details that I just didn't quite have in memory out there in the apiary. So let's talk a little bit about what is Chlorantraniliprole. Obviously, it's a man-made substance. It's a molecule that is been used in pesticides, and it has basically some documentation that we can look at as beekeepers or as gardeners. The EPA has a pesticide fact sheet that is available, and I'll put the link to that down in the description below. It's got a lot of detail and a lot of things that non-scientific folks might not understand with regards to the parameters around the chemical that has been registered with the EPA. But it was registered with the EPA in 2008. And there's also another document from the National Pesticide Information Center. And there are fact sheets on Chlorantraniliprole. I'm going to keep saying that poorly probably. And this one is the one I found the most useful with respect to talking about the chemical and basically describing it in the class of chemical agent that it is. There are a lot of products out that are marketed out there. The two that we're talking about today are acelepryn and Grub-X. And basically, Chlorantraniliprole is a paralyzing agent for grubs and beetles. That's essentially what it does. It binds to the receptors in the muscles called the ryanodine receptors, and then it basically makes them paralyzed, so they essentially leak calcium and they cannot live. That's how the mode of action works. The most important thing, I think, is when using substances like this is the concern to both us and our environment, right? So the fact sheet here also describes the toxicity to humans and labels it that it is not likely to be a carcinogen, meaning like it's very, very low. And you see here in these documents and here, everything highlighted in the yellowish, and I've got it in circled in red here. That is actually where it fits on this table. And this, to humans, with both the LD50, which is a lethal dose of 50%, and the concentration LC50s are all in the very low toxicity range over to the far right, which is the lowest scale they actually have on these charts. If you're confused about the numbers and the measurements on here, read the notes in the original document. They talk about it a little bit. It can be a little bit backwards. They have also toxicity to different animal types, and on this chart here, basically we've got aquatic and honeybees. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is aquatic invertebrate. So this is the one of the areas that I would say there is some concern, especially if you're going to be using this substance anywhere near water with invertebrates. Invertebrates in water would be like crayfish, shellfish, mussels, clams, things like that. It does apparently have high toxicity to this type of animal. And here you can see that circled in red with the yellow box. But the honeybees, down in the lower section of this, is at low toxicity, which is the good news and why we're even talking about this, because Dr. Bartlett and Dr. Dan Potter have done the work here to look for an agent that essentially is safe to honeybees, but that does not affect the receptors of the larva and the bee there, but does other creatures such as the small hive beetle, which we're after here. Birds and fish, I'll also say, are over on the low and the very low toxicity, so think about things like that. Very low concern there. I will say that as gardeners and caretakers of pollinators, the fact that this substance does attack grubs and larvae, it has been shown to be very toxic to moths and to butterflies. So this is probably the number one reason as a beekeeper I would consider not using this, or how I would use it needs to be very, very controlled. I love to have my monarchs. I got my pollinator gardens out here, and the last thing I want to do is lose those little caterpillars that turn into monarchs here in my garden. I wish this worked on wax moths, but obviously using this on wax moths is an unlabeled treatment, and I don't have any information on that at this time. But monarchs and things like that, I don't want to hurt. So wherever I put this substance is going to be nowhere near milkweed and going to be very tightly constrained right around my apiary. But if you have any sort of mixed scenario, or if you have pollinator flowers right around your beehives, you might want to consider that as a consideration here. I do not, and that is one thing I think is worth mentioning here. Okay, so we have two products we're going to go over here. The first is the GrubX product that I told you I bought at Home Depot. I think outside I said it weighed 30 pounds. It's a 15-pound bag that was $30. If I misspoke, I apologize for that. And here in this picture, I've essentially zoomed in and shown you the active ingredient is Chlorantraniliprole, and it has a 0.08 active ingredient concentration here. The GrubX is a granule, and I showed you some size of it out in the field. On the back, and here's the application and the instructions we have with this product. Basically, you're applying it dry with a spreader, and apply 2.87 pounds of this product per 1,000 feet. So that is the dosage that they recommend. And on this one, the maximum number of applications is 1 per year. So don't go out and hit this every season, at least according to the label. That's the way they're saying it here. There is that one little extra thing I do want to talk about with regard to New York State. Do not apply within 100 feet of a water body, lake, pond, river, or stream. I think New York has just highlighted the risk to the aquatic invertebrates, and they don't want this into the water system anywhere. 100 feet obviously is something you may need to concern yourself with if you have an apiary right near a stream or water. Don't want that to get into the water supply if you have invertebrates that could be affected, such as shellfish, crayfish, things like that. So this is the product. I wanted to put this detail out there so you just didn't go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy this and go out and just start spreading it like it was fertilizer. It is an insecticide designed to control grubs, but it does have some impacts that are worth talking about. And the application, according to the label, is the most important part to think here. Okay, the second product I'm going to mention here is the aceleprin concentrate. So the aceleprin is where I started, and because I prefer to distribute things through a dilution and a sprayer. I have a 3-gallon backpack sprayer that I use for many different things in my apiary and yard, and that is where I started. This product is a little bit more expensive, as I mentioned. It's available in several locations, and the cheapest I found it for 4 ounces was $80. But if you see the concentration here at 18.4% chlorantraniliprole, it's much, much higher concentrated, so you use very, very small amounts. This is probably a little bit more of a commercial size product, but if you want to have a small bottle and don't want to have a bag that might dry out in your shed or wherever you keep your chemicals, this may be a better option for you. So there's the front. The back side basically showing the exact same thing. Not much to do there. But there is this little packet that comes with the aceleprin that did not come with the GrubX that has a lot more detail on the dosages and restrictions that I figured it would be good to go over here. So usage restrictions, and here the maximum single application rate. So here with the aceleprin, there is an opportunity to distribute a little bit more than once a year. And I've highlighted the target pest. There are several target pests and ornamental type of pests that are mentioned in this documentation, but I'm highlighting the white grub test to most closely represent the small hive beetle that we are trying to target with this Chlorantraniliprole. And if you see down in the bottom section, I've highlighted the dosage rate. There's a range of 0.18 to 0.37 fluid ounces, which is a very small amount, per 1,000 square feet. And there's some acre dosages down there too. I've essentially measured out my apiary size, and I am just shy of 1,000 feet, paced off. So if I'm going to mix up my dilution rate, I'm just going to make sure I distribute it across that entire area so I get my dosages accurate. But up top here, you'll see the maximum rate is 0.37 per 1,000 square feet. So don't exceed 3.7. If you wanted to do a lower dose, you could go all the way down to 1.8. And that is something that we can experiment with over time if you're planning on doing this. The outdoor, the second circle I have here is for outdoor field-grown production. Do not apply more than 38.3 fluid ounces of aceleprin per acre. And that's the annual dosage rate. So essentially, they're saying you can do this between 2 to 3 times a year, but the maximum amount you can put is that dosage rate there per year. So that is a little bit of a decision on how to use this in the season. And obviously we're going after the pupation phase. So if you're in the south, probably once the evening temperatures get above 50 degrees, you're kind of in that range where pupation is going to start to accelerate. I think probably the range here is to just recognize these are maximums. The GrubX bag just had once per year with the weight, and here you've got a distribution maximum per year. I think that the chart also gave a dilution table. This is not really anything to change anything, but it talks about, if you were going to use a larger sprayer or a larger bucket, there's also a dilution table so you can get your measurements right, so you can get your rate, and if you were to spray it over a broader area. So that is the chemical Chlorantraniliprole and the two products, GrubX and Aceleprin, that I have purchased and showed you earlier, and for ground soil drench to manage it. There are some other questions with regards to using these that I don't have answered yet. Will a small hive beetle larva go down and attempt to pupate in soil that is drenched, or will they walk over it? I don't know, but my initial impression is they are trying to pupate in it, and it's not succeeding, because I have seen an improvement in my decrease in small hive beetle population. Over the years, there's been other insecticides that have been used, like permethrin to ground drench. That has been an age-old chemical and insecticide, but that one definitely has some toxicity to bees, and we've been using that in our ground drench for years. And I don't know if that made much of a difference, but if the small hive beetle larva did try to pupate in the permethrin, it probably had the same exact effect. This is just an opportunity to do it without any toxicity to honeybees that have been shown. So there's a lot going on here. I think it's worth talking about. Hopefully this type of detail is helpful to you. Please use it wisely. The label is the law. This is not for use inside of the hives, but the opportunities here with perhaps having low toxicity to bees does give us something to think forward to, that maybe we can actually get something to get these small hive beetles out of our hives other than the mechanical treatments like the Dixie towels or the barns and the things like that trap them in oil where physically they just get stuck. In any case, thanks for your attention, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay, this is just a footer to finish up the video. Hopefully you enjoyed the discussion on Chlorantraniliprole. Please use the label as the law. I'm not promoting usage of this in your hives, but I do want to talk about what it perhaps offers as an opportunity to break the life cycle of the small hive beetle in the soil around our hives. There are some toxicity things to think about, as I've mentioned. Please look into those and understand your environment. And I think that this is something that we can throw in our toolkit if you use it appropriately. Hopefully you enjoy this content. If you do, please leave a comment below. Share this channel with others. I'm trying to grow this channel as much as I can. Please consider like and subscribe if you do enjoy it. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time.